Hello and welcome to this episode of the Parents in PR podcast, a mini-series within Spark by PRCA. I'm Alex Stevens, founder of Parents in PR and business director at Reuben, Sinclair, and today I'm joined by Stephen Kenwright. Stephen is strategy director at Ride Shotgun, working with 200 other riders to produce and activate creative content for brands like HSBC, Amazon, and John Lewis. Stephen previously co-founded digital PR agency Rise at 7 in 2019, initially serving as chief operating officer and then chief commercial officer before exiting via MBO in 2022. During his 3-year tenure, the agency grew revenues from nothing to more than £7 million, hired 110 people and opened offices in Sheffield, London, Manchester and New York, and won more than 70 awards in that time, which works out about one every 2 weeks. Stephen is also dad to Max, and he recently returned to work after taking nearly 2 years off to be a stay-at-home dad. Stephen, thank you so much for joining me and congratulations on your new role.
Thank you very much. Very fresh. Loving it so far.
Exciting. Good stuff. Well, I want to come on to kind of more recent events in a minute. But first, I'd love to talk to you about becoming a dad, because I understand you started Rise at 7 when your wife was 5 months pregnant. So the business was only about 4 months old when you went off on paternity leave, which must have been equal parts exciting and terrifying.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, my background, like historically, has been agency, and the run up, when me and my wife reached that age where we thought, it's time to start a family. I'd been in hotels 3 nights a week, been on the road all the time, etc. This is obviously pre-COVID. And it felt very unsustainable. So as much as I loved my first agency, I'd gone in-house for a time, planning to be there for quite a long time, actually, and it just didn't really work out. And I'm not saying for a second that in-house is easier or slower or whatever, but it is in one place. You're in a singular office, you're not living in hotels, etc. So we kind of got this vision of going brand side and having a little bit more stability, and it just wasn't to be. And we got this when that was very clear it wasn't going to work out. We had this moment of, well, I'd waited a really long time for that job. I live in the countryside as well, and I'm in the north, so there are not an abundance of really good brands up here in the countryside. There's some good brands in Manchester and Leeds and Sheffield and so on, but not a lot in the countryside. So I thought, I'm going to have to do something. So we started the agency, and it was in many ways terrible timing, but it seemed like the best option at the time.
It's a bit like having children. There's never a good time. So you just kind
Exactly. Exactly, yeah.
And so I guess being part of a fast growth startup, I'm imagining your kind of return to work, the end of your paternity leave, you sort of came back all hands on deck. Is that right? Or how did you do it?
Pretty much. I mean, we were fortunate, and really the main objective when we'd first started was to be able to grow fast enough to hire someone to cover my workload so that I could have a couple of weeks off. And we did manage that. And Matt Jones, who came in to do the day-to-day work on the technical side, which is what I was originally doing, was very capable, and I felt pretty comfortable, leaving him to it to a degree for 2 weeks, even though he was only 2 weeks into the business. But you don't get that initial period of paternity very often.
No.
And being a startup, right, we only had the very bog standard 2 weeks, exactly how it is by default, rather than anything a little bit more comprehensive. And that was definitely, as we grew, something that I wanted to change as well. So we did have enhanced paternity and maternity parental leave generally as we grew, but in those very early stages it just wasn't feasible. So yes, straight back to it. And that was like October time. So we started in June, and then Max was born in October, and then we had a good 6 months before a pandemic. So whether you call that normal or not, I don't know, but that was the norm for a while.
Baptism of fire for sure. And I guess great that you kind of had that experience of, well, not great for you, but the experience of having a short paternity leave obviously influenced your policy and sort of decision making later down the line, and when you're sort of coming into making decisions for your own employees. I guess that kind of really helps in some ways, even though, like I say, it wasn't the best for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things I think, obviously, I was a new dad at the time, but I think you kind of get to see some of the difficulties of being a parent firsthand, and that really does influence you. And if you haven't seen that, And if you know, as agencies often are, a somewhat younger management team in some startup agencies, it's like you have an idea of what it might be like, but it's very difficult to make
Mm.
policy decisions from an empathetic point of view, really. So it did help,
Yeah.
definitely. And obviously talking to my wife as well about her return to work, which
Mm.
was much more phased. She had a year of maternity and a lot of that through the pandemic, which was not ideal at all. But
Mm.
then she went back to work and then got furloughed a few weeks later. So she had a really long maternity leave. But the situation that the country was in, the world was in, that was far from ideal either,
Mm.
really, I think.
Of course, yeah. Um, we often hear about mothers kind of taking a career break after having children, and that's not unusual, but admittedly, it's slightly more unusual to hear of kind of fathers doing the same thing. So I kind of wanted to talk to you about that. And what was that part of your kind of decision to become a stay-at-home dad? Was that part of the fact because you had that such a short period of time at the beginning, or yeah, what sort of influenced that decision making?
I mean, that was certainly part of it. It wasn't necessarily just the 2 weeks, because as much as the pandemic was problematic, at the same time, back into agency life, it wasn't the same. It wasn't traveling all the time. It was calls from home. So actually, I got to see my little boy a lot more often than I would have done under normal circumstances as an agency owner, startup or otherwise. So I did get a lot more time with him at those early stages, but it was also quite, there wasn't a break for me between leaving my first agency, going in house, realizing that wasn't going to work, starting a new agency. All felt like it was just rapid, one thing after the other. And it was ultimately, I think, partially that and partially just the speed of growth. We were hiring and onboarding one person every single week for a year at one point, and there was just a lot going on. And I think we had, me and my co-founder Carrie, we had a lot of conversations, but one particular conversation I remember really well about the future, and we'd kind of got to this point that we thought would take 5 years in 2.5, where, right, this is the number, this is what we wanted to achieve, and we're going to go to market and sell the business. And we had different viewpoints on that. That's what I wanted to do, and Carrie loved the business as it was and wanted to continue to run it. So it was a real, for me, like a combination of, I was pretty clear that I wanted to exit, and I could have stayed and carried on, but actually I had the opportunity, and very fortunate to have the opportunity to do that. And then combination of that and Max still being at home, still being a little boy and not at school yet, and taking that time off, just felt like everything all right at the same time. So it was definitely a big factor in the decision making, for sure.
The stars kind of aligned in terms of timing, and
Mm.
yeah, and really came together. I mean, an amazing opportunity for you to be able to kind of do that. I'm guessing the impact that it had on your family and your time with your son, generally speaking, was a really positive one. Yeah, how did it sort of pan out? Was that break a really welcome one? I say break. I actually kick myself for saying break, because it's never a break looking after a child
Yeah.
at a time, but a break from work.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's been fantastic. Just, I mean, there's, again, I say with COVID, things were a little bit different to how I'd imagined them previously. When we fell pregnant, it was like the world was a completely different
Mm.
place. So it's not what I had in mind, and actually, it's been better in lots of ways, anyway. But just being able to, drop him off at nursery, to pick him up, to take him places. And my wife has been back at work for quite a while now. She's worked part-time, so we've had long weekends together, and then a lot of other time besides. So it's yeah, I think such a rare opportunity that I think now we're sort of going through this transition where Max is just about to leave nursery and start to go to school, and everything's changing for him all at once. I think it's quite interesting. Just he's not experienced anything other, right? He's not
Mm.
experienced his dad being away or working really late and that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's so true. And like you say, it's you were in a really fortunate position that you're able to do so. But I suppose there are opportunities for things like shared parental leave now that means that other dads can kind of take an extended break. So I think it's really important that we kind of talk about these things and make sure that other people are aware of the positive impact it can have on your family. It sounds like you had a really great time in terms of being able to spend the time with him.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the more we talk about equality in that sense, and normalize some of these things for sure,
Mm,
because there's there's assumptions. I think that the mother's going to be the one who's primary caregiver, and the father goes back to work. And
yeah.
I think there's plenty of situations where that makes sense, and
Mm,
that's the right thing for that family to do. But I think it is a per family basis,
yeah.
uh, and we've got to be thinking about these things as policymakers, whether government level, but to be honest, just at a business, at a PR agency, we've got to give our staff the opportunity to decide what's right for them without just assuming that the choice is going to be the quote unquote traditional one.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really interesting because I love reading your content on LinkedIn that you have shared recently about kind of being a stay-at-home dad and being proud to kind of be a parent in a professional setting. And I think that's really a really good point that you make about kind of employers being aware of the different kind of avenues that people want to go down. So I guess, yeah, what else can kind of employers do to encourage dads to be a bit more vocal about their needs as a working parent and break that stereotype of mums always playing the kind of default carer, like you said?
I think like the first thing, because I did this as a startup and from scratch thinking about policy. You typically you're going to go talk to your lawyers about your employment lawyers about what
Mhm.
policies you need in place, etc. And I think the first thing is to just read them and think about, does this sound like it makes sense? Does this sound like, obviously they're there to protect you from a legal point of view as an
Mm.
employer, but if you are a father or a potential father reading those policies and just trying them on the size yourself, like do they make sense?
From a human
Because
perspective as opposed to a
yeah,
legal.
because the
Mm.
standard ones are not
No.
that geared that way at all. And I think if you just read the policies and have in your mind about this should apply both ways, your eyes become open quite quickly to a lot of
Mm.
these different things where what the law says and what your staff are experiencing is probably quite different. I mean, you can absolutely just talk to your staff as well, because it really does depend on the makeup of your business. And I appreciate PR has got a certain makeup, just like coming from digital marketing has been the exact opposite, in fact. And it's been quite interesting to see that difference between different types of agencies. But I think it's always helpful to design a survey or design a comms plan in such a way where you are not you're trying to lead people a certain way. You're trying to make sure that you are having constructive conversations. You're asking the right questions, and you're not just saying, "How do you feel about this?" Because
Mm.
people feel a lot of things all the time, and it depends on how you catch them and what kind of day they've had, how they feel about certain things. So if you start from that point of does this sound fair and does this sound equal, and lead through to actually talking to people and saying, uh, how do you feel about this? Then you can
Mm.
start to get some real feedback and have opportunity to put something different in place that makes more sense for your business.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So yeah, I guess I come at it from a human angle and communication are two key things there. So Max is off to school in September, I believe. So hence now
Mhm.
being a kind of a good time to return back to the workplace. And we often hear about people kind of struggling sometimes to return to work after a period of time away. I'm really curious to hear how your career break was perceived in the job market. Were prospective employers quite interested in that? Did it come up at all, or yeah, what was the feedback?
I don't. I was expecting more conversations to happen about how I've kept up to date with what's going on,
Mhm.
and it's not been asked of me specifically. I appreciate also that I've been somewhat removed from tactical roles for quite a long time, and I think the tactics are what change most frequently, right? So you're thinking about social media, for example. that changes really rapidly.
Mm.
Whereas the kind of more strategic end of things, strategy in PR and in agencies is pretty consistent. So I think that's probably why I haven't been asked. But I haven't been asked. I thought that it would come up in conversation quite frequently throughout that interview process. What I think has really been interesting is just how the conversation about things like working from the office and working from home and that kind of thing have come up, because it seems like employers are willing to be flexible, but you don't want you want to have the right amount of face time. You don't want to have any kind of special treatment. You don't want to be in a different situation to everyone else. You want to experience the agency or the business in the same way that everyone else does, if you really want to understand how it works and be able to affect change in that business. So I think from my personal standpoint, where I've been at home on my own, with my little boy, but without the kind of professional context for quite a long time now. I was like, I need to get back to the office, so I needed to be somewhere where I can go and see some people at least some of the week.
Yeah.
And I wasn't expecting that, but that was something I was really excited about when actually going through the interview process. I was much more open and flexible with a kind of commute and everything like that than I thought I was going to be.
That's interesting. And I actually can kind of relate to that. I think the days that I'm in the office, I really cherish and value now, because it's not as frequent as it used to be pre-COVID. And now I've had a baby, I really do like that kind of adult time where I'm really sort of focused and not at home and distracted at all. So yeah, that's a really interesting one.
Yeah, and I think that's again something that's just completely different to pre-COVID, because when you were working from home previously, it's because you've got some appointment or some delivery or something like that, and as you feel like almost I have to work from home, or at least that's the perception. And I think your way of putting it, you cherish the time in the office. I think it's really just you try and design your time so that you make the most of the time in the
Yeah,
office
it's
and
more
then the
effective.
most of the time working from home.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I totally agree. I appreciate it's very early days, but how have you found it being back at work? And is that sort of work parent juggle any easier than it was back in the day, or are the same challenges the same challenges?
I think it's felt good so far, and like I said, it's nice to have that stimulation being in the office and having adult conversations, and then
Yeah.
coming back. So far, my employer Ride Shotgun have been really good about, I can work from home if I need to, and I can come back when I need to, and those kind of flexible opportunities.
Mm.
I think that's really positive. I don't know if they were like that pre-COVID or not. Maybe they were, maybe they weren't. But it's good to. I think it feels like the balance is pretty good at the moment.
Yeah, that's really encouraging to hear, and hopefully employers are becoming a little bit more progressive when it comes to things like that, and like you say, taking that kind of human first approach when kind of devising these policies. Um, so final thing, I guess from my side is, like I say, this podcast is sometimes about sort of providing a little bit of inspiration for others, and I'm really keen to hear whether you've got any advice for any dads who might be considering taking extended parental leave or a career break, or shared parental leave, so that they can take a little bit longer out to be at home with their child or their children. Yeah, do you have any advice for people that might be in that, or contemplating being in that position?
I would say that in my experience, the stigma is more in your head than it is in the world. And I do think, like, if you've got the opportunity to do it, then you're, as they say, a long time retired, but you're at work for years and years ahead of you. So it's it's not often that you do get those opportunities, and I do think that it's worth taking them. But absolutely, a lot of the kind of concerns that you might have about how this is going to be perceived, I've had nothing but respect about it. People have been very positive about it, and I, I, I don't. Yeah, I think that that's probably how it could be, right? I think that's positive for a lot of people.
It's really encouraging to hear, and yeah, like you say, I think if you're fortunate enough to be in the position where you can do it, you're never going to regret the time that you do spend with your children, but you might regret the time
Absolutely.
you don't. Stephen, thank you so much for joining me and sharing that story. It was really, really interesting. I could have spoken for a lot longer about it, but hopefully that will show kind of some other working dads that they can do things a little bit differently should they wish. So yeah, huge thanks for chatting to me about it.
Very welcome. Thank you for asking.
No worries.